Hello, tomato growers. This is Ray Kruse, your tomato growing mentor. And our tomatoes are making it out of their transplant shock phase, and they're starting to put on growth, and things are looking wonderfully. A lot of you have contacted me over the past few weeks asking me questions over your tomatoes. I'm so glad that you're doing so. I have been surprised at the variability in tomato growth out there. Some of you are way far ahead of me, and others are far behind, and that's okay. We have a lot of growing season left ahead of us to get ourselves a crop of tomatoes. So no worries, wherever you are in growing your tomatoes. We're going to focus today on trellising our tomatoes. And when we trellis our tomatoes, there's a lot of benefits to doing that. If we imagine this tomato plant right here, it's going to grow really tall, and it doesn't have the support to hold up the fruit and the branches all on its own. And it's going to fall over on the soil and expose that tomato to increased amounts of disease in the soil. The fruit's going to get dirty. It makes it harder to harvest. It also takes up a lot of space. And trellising solves all these problems by putting it up high in the air. And that's what we're going to talk about. The first option in trying to trellis is our classic tomato cage. And this is something that you can just buy at the local hardware store. This one was $2. And what happens is you just place this tomato cage over top of your tomatoes, and there's a smaller ring all the way at the bottom. You'll center your tomato in the center of that and sink these wires down at the base all the way around your tomato. And then throughout the summer, you'll just keep, as your tomato grows, you'll keep tucking those branches inside the rings as it comes over the top, and it will drape over. I have had my issues with these cages over the years. They are rather flimsy. I mean, this $2 cage, you get 10, maybe 12 pounds worth of vines and tomatoes on there. That's just going to fall over in a light wind, and it's kind of an insult to the gardener to sell them something so cheap. I've got paper clips at the office of better metal than that. But anyway, there's an option for you if you choose to do so. You can make them out of heavier wire, such as concrete reinforcing mesh, or woven wire that they use for animals, and just make a cylinder that's about 2 feet and put that over your tomatoes. That also works too. But that is the cage option. Our next option is the pole method, or the central leader method. So if we imagine this tomato plant here planted next to this pole, what we would do is, as this tomato would start to grow, we would clip off any additional branches. So we have this branch here, we clip that off, and we would save this high central leader here and constantly tie it to this pole as it goes up. And while that may allow for more airflow with the less amount of foliage around the plant and things like that, and also might allow for easier picking because you have less foliage to pick around, I feel like it's a lot of work to try and eliminate all these other branches that might come up on this plant here just to make things easier to pick or reduce the airflow. And it's a lot of care to go ahead and tie that up every time in every plant all the time. It takes a lot of care. So there's another option that you can try. This option is also not something that you can do very easily on your hybrid tomatoes because they are a determinate or a bush type tomato. You'll see greatly reduced yields in them because they require multiple branches of tomatoes to be producing at one time in order for you to get yield, as opposed to an heirloom, something like this, where you can trim off these additional branches and they're an indeterminate vine and they'll just keep growing and growing and growing. And that's why some people like to do this on long poles like this. But there's a third method I'd like to bring up to you, and it's called the weave system, and some people call it the Florida basket weave. And what that is we pound in a series of poles all the way down our row of tomatoes. You can see this here. I have one pounded in every other tomato. So I have a pole and a tomato and a marigold and a tomato and a pole. And the pattern goes on like that. And then what we do is we come in here with some twine string that we purchased from the store. And this twine string is Baylor twine. It comes in 4,000-foot spools. And one spool did me last year, I think, about 68 tomatoes. So you'll be set for a few years if you buy this. Like I said, it's like $30, $40 a spool, somewhere around there. It comes in red normally. This just happens to be blue. You can also get a biodegradable twine, but I myself am a little concerned about the treatments that they apply to those biodegradable twines and what those residues might do to my health if it gets onto my tomatoes that I'm eating. So I like to use plastic. But these poles, you can get them from the garden center or the farm store for about $7 a piece, and they're reusable. It's great, and I really found this system quite interesting and useful when I was in grad school. So like I said, we start off with our first pole on the row right here, and we tie off the end of our twine. And we come down with our twine here, I'm going to grab it, and we come down the side of our tomatoes here, and we're going to be about 6 to 8 inches off the ground, and we're going to pull this twine tight. Well, actually, we're going to come to the top of the pole here and tie this around the top, and we're going to slide it down the pole to we're about 6 to 8 inches off the ground, and we're going to pull it tight. And what we're going to do is we're going to line that line right up with the sides of our tomatoes to provide them support. And we're going to continue this pattern. We're going to pull this tight. We're going to go down 1, 2 tomatoes to the pole. We're going to wind around the top. We're going to sink this line down to about 6 to 8 inches. Sorry about the camera there. It's hard to do this one-handed. But yeah, you can see that twine there is right alongside our tomatoes. Now, if we're going to pretend that this is the end of the row, what we'll do is we'll simply wind this around the end. Like that. And we're going to come down the other side of our tomatoes here. And we're going to go down tomato 1, tomato 2, and we're going to come up to the top here, loop around the top, and we're going to pull our twines tight. So you can see here, here's the pole, there's tomato 1, tomato 2, and the pole. And we just continue that. And then if we imagine this was the end of the row, we just tie off our twine right there and let it sit. And you'd repeat this process every time your tomatoes get about a foot above the twine, add another twine at 6 to 8 inches above the last. And you just keep going all the way up the pole. And then once you reach the top of the pole, your tomatoes will eventually come over the top. And unfortunately, on some windy July day, they'll tip over and they'll continue growing back down the side of the trellis. But that's okay. That's naturally what they do. They just look so beautiful when they're sitting over the top of the trellis. You're like, wow, really got a cool crop. But anyway, this is the basket weave system. And this is what I prefer, just simply because you can take this all down at the end of the year, reuse your posts, throw away the twine, and reduce the amount of carryover of disease and things like that in the twine, which is touching your tomatoes for next year. So some other things to think about and tips as we go forward in the season that are not related to trellising are insects. Now, I was watching this little tomato earlier this year when I transplanted him, and it had some insect damage. And I kept a close eye on it, and I never found an insect, but it did stop feeding on the tomato here. But if you see some tomato insects or anything like that, the first thing to try and do is to try and find them around the tomato. Look underneath the mulch and things like that and try and identify what you're dealing with so that you have an idea and you can study its life cycle a little bit and hopefully come up with a management plan, or if you decide to do some type of insecticide, you can treat appropriately. The other thing is foliar diseases. And some of you have already contacted me that have had foliar disease problems. And though all of you in the Dubuque region will probably encounter some form or another of foliar disease throughout the season, it's the good practices that we can try to do to stave off that disease. That's the best we can really do. And so if you're already encountering disease, I encourage you to do some of the good growing practices that we've done in some of the past newsletters. And if you do elect to do a fungicide, to properly identify that fungus that you're dealing with. So that way, if you do elect to do the fungicide, you're using the appropriate fungicide for the appropriate fungus. But this is it for tomato growing update number 5. And with that, I hope you have good luck continuing to grow your tomatoes. This is Ray Kruse, your tomato growing mentor. Happy growing, everybody.